In America, they simply call it the franchise. No other TV series can claim such universal recognition, and no other TV series has such ideologically committed fans. For those of you still unsure what all the fuss is about, Star Trek's story now voyages through the Federation's mighty legacy.
The Starship Enterprise has become an ark of hope to a new generation. Star Trek offers us a vision of what it is to be fully human, to explore our universe with a band of brothers and sisters, to live out a kind of cosmic monasticism. I believe it is a glorious new mythology, a wonderful addition to our ancient holy books. Star Trek, live long and prosper.
This Star Trek franchise, which exists here in this studio, Paramount, has to date been worth almost $4 billion to the studio. I mean, that's more than the gross national product of a lot of countries, isn't it?
The joke about beam me up, Scotty, there's no intelligent life here, I suppose, has traveled around the world by now. Live long and prosper is in the culture. People understand what you're talking about. People recognize this as a symbol of an icon.
Astronauts became astronauts because of Star Trek. Movie makers became movie makers because of Star Trek. It affected people's lives in a very minor way, where they had to take a Tums after dinner because they were watching it during dinner and didn't chew their food properly, or it changed a life and sent it in another direction.
I think it's better than a religion, if I may be so bold. It's a cultural uplifting that all peoples can feel connected to.
Star Trek.
At the edge of the universe, 400 men and women are probing the immeasurable blackness of space. Their leaders are an Earthman with no fear and a stranger with no heart. Worlds beyond imagination lie before them in Star Trek. Every Thursday on the NBC television network, in color.
I had known about Roddenberry a bit because he had a series on NBC. I'd known he was a former police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. I'd known he was a former pilot with Pan American. And I figured, hey, this is a stand-up, straight-backed, aggressive, hustling man. The door opened, and this kind of tall, badly dressed, muttering man walked in with a piece of paper in his hand saying, I have this idea for a television series. I call it Star Trek.
Gene Roddenberry was very complex, very talented. He had a very strong and wonderful passion that had to do with the potential of mankind.
He did say one thing to me once that I found incredibly peculiar. He said, you know, Data has a Christ-like naivete. And I thought, was Christ naive? I'm not sure. You know.
He had the reputation of being a real son of a bitch, and nobody wanted to work with him. I was the youngest tenured person on the staff, so I got the job.
Gene would borrow things from people, ideas, concepts, what have you, and Gene would never mention where they were from. He would not say that they were his ideas, but he would lead you to believe they were.
People worked in it. They brought ideas, they brought thoughts, they brought expertise to it. But as far as the idea of the show is concerned, that was Gene Roddenberry's, and I resent anyone who comes along and tries to take that away from him.
There was this very tall, weird person on the set, this man in a tweed overcoat and a hat and a hawk nose. And he kept walking up behind me, and he was so creepy. And I was getting ready to really let him have it when I realized it. And I went, Mr. Roddenberry! Jean, oh future visionary Jean, you gave me tears and laughter, Jean. You shine the starlight on my dream. Jean, a daring flying hero, Jean. You always soared with eagles, Jean. Your universe was meant to be.
I wasn't quite sure that the American audience was ready for this. I mean, we had our Buck Rogers, and we had our Flash Gordons, and we had our Space Patrols. But Gene had one thing that I thought was really, really special. And that was that Gene set the whole thing as a naval ship. It was something that we, the audience, could easily understand. It was yeoman and port and starboard and admiral and captain and such, and it wasn't weird names. It wasn't Spaceship X9 and such, and I thought that was really great.
The Starship Enterprise made her maiden voyage in a pilot for the NBC television network. There were few familiar faces on board. Only one character was to survive to the first series, and even then, his survival looked uncertain.
Check the circuit. All operating, sir. Config the screen, then.
Definitely something out there, Captain. Headed this way.
NBC was worried that Spock was perhaps too devilish and frightening and off-putting for the viewers and potential buyers of the series, and they decided to humanize him, to eliminate this Mephistophelian look, to eliminate the pointed ears, and to some extent straighten out the eyebrows. That's interesting, thought I. And fortunately, Gene prevailed. They didn't want the character in the series. They were nervous about the character.
They're on the air like 4 weeks, and NBC calls and says, "Hey, can we get more of those Spock shows on quickly?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, the phones are ringing off the hook, the mail's coming in, the affiliates are thrilled, the sponsors are happy. We got a big star on our hands."
NBC did a total turnaround. They said, "Well, we have to have more Spock. We knew all along that this would be a wonderful character. Give us more Spock. Just have Spock on screen all the time."
Fail to see what they find so amusing.
What do you call those?
I call them ears.
You belong in a circus, Spock. Not a starship.
Pointed-eared hobgoblin.
Why can't I blow off just one of his ears?
He was exotic, interesting, mysterious, unique.
Hit me. Harder. Again. That will be quite enough. Thank you, Doctor.
Fun, clever, intelligent. They tell me sexy.
I love you. I don't know why, but I love you. I do love you.
There was an explosion of interest in the Spock character.
I said, please don't tell Spock that I said he was the best first officer in the fleet.
Why, thank you, Dr. McCoy.
You've been so concerned about his Vulcan eyes, Doctor. You forgot about his Vulcan ears.
I've been involved with a particular character for 30 years. And I think it's fairly reasonable to expect that character would take on an identity within mine, as part of my own, And I think it's reasonable to understand that I hear a voice sometimes that is more Spock-like than my own. I don't always talk like him. I don't act like him. I don't necessarily think or experience things in the way that he does. But every once in a while, in a given situation, I might hear a voice that says, do you really think that this is the approach you want to take to this problem? Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe I should rethink this. And that rational voice is the voice of Spock, sitting on my shoulder, sort of, watching and occasionally commenting on my process.
Fascinating.
Back in the 60s, there was a fierce amount of censorship that was going on. And you couldn't talk about things. You couldn't talk about war. You couldn't talk about black-white problem. You couldn't even talk about mother love, and I'll never understand why for that. But there was a whole list of taboos. And Gene always wanted to tell people how he felt about it. He didn't care whether, they did or not, but he'd like to kind of set an example and talk about it, and he wasn't allowed to. So he figured, well, maybe if I put these people in funny costumes and stick them out into space, I can get by the censors with it. And by God, he did.
Many of our best stories grew out of the reality of what was happening in the world at that time, and particularly in the United States. The civil rights movement, for example, the various assassinations that had taken place, and some of our best episodes were drawn from those issues, so they were relevant.
That was in the late 1960s.
Apparently, Captain. So are we.
I was growing up in the South in a segregated community. I went to segregated schools. And when I first looked at Star Trek, what I saw there was a phenomenal representation of a utopian society which was governed in part by multicultural principles. That is, I would have seen the first interracial kiss on American television. I would have seen Russian crewmen aboard a U.S.-based spaceship in the midst of the Cold War. I would have seen black and Asian American characters represented on American television.
As an Air Force chaplain, I saw actual hydrogen bombs. I learned we could blow our world apart, and I started looking for an alternative that was life-giving rather than life-destroying. And one of these alternatives that appeared on television shortly after I left the Air Force was Star Trek. We had a crew made up of different races and sexes, cooperating and not fighting each other. What a wonderful vision, I thought. And finally I decided to preach a sermon about it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
It was, on one hand, a story about JFK, about John F. Kennedy. I think Kirk is very much modeled after Kennedy. The youngest Starfleet captain, the young PT boat captain who became the youngest American president. A lot of the rhetoric was about, I think in some levels one can see Starfleet as the Peace Corps in outer space.
We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
I have a theory that you can really get sort of a glimpse of America's state of mind by looking at Star Trek. They were always right. They always knew exactly what to do. They would go in there with guns blazing. The prime directive, the non-interference directive, was the thing that Kirk quoted right before he always then ignored it.
Now, Captain, what are you going to order your men to do?
Concentrate your phaser fire at what appears to be its head.
Kirk continually intervenes. He continually disrupts and destabilizes governments.
Photon torpedoes, fire.
Commence firing and maintain.
Your orders are shoot to kill.
Oh, but there's that prime directive in the way again. Can't interfere.
He seems to embody the Vietnam War era idea of America as a policeman who interferes in other people's business.
Klingons called you a tin-plated, overbearing, swaggering dictator with delusions of godhood.
Is that all?
No, sir. They also compared you with a Danubian slime devil.
I see.
And then they said that you were...
I get the picture.
The Enterprise went out into space and kicked ass and took names. That's what the show was about, because that's what America was about.
All this power surging and throbbing, yet under control. Are you like that, Captain?
You can count on it.
Star Trek made things like space and exploration look pretty darn sexy. You had Captain Kirk, the Hound of the Universe. You had the unreachable Mr. Spock.
Your face is wet.
Most women basically looked at him and said, well, give me 5 minutes with him and he'll be a lot more reachable. So Star Trek is a very sexy show.
Well, Gene had wanted very, very much to show women in a more positive point of view, and women that were stronger, because he said they exist in the world. But that failing, then he kind of pulled back a little and said, okay, so there are pretty things. And that's why we ended up with little short skirts and big bouffant hairdos, and it was a very sexist thing to do, but he did it.
Gene Roddenberry would drop everything he was doing when it came time to approve a costume, especially if it was a costume on a female. He had an eye for the ladies. It didn't matter what it was, a story conference, cutting a film, the daily rushes, whatever. He would stop and he would immediately proceed to make it better. And by making it better, one means that making it more revealing and less voluminous.
Am I more presentable now?
A bit.
There is something subversive about costumes which show the entire side of a woman's body, or that show a cross-section of her breasts, but not any parts that will get it censored, yet those are always done in the service of turning women into sexual objects.
Kiss me.
There was that gravity-defying element to the costumes that made them very painful for us in the real world, trying to live up to those standards.
I'm sorry, Shannon.
Both Beverly Crusher and Yeoman Rand in the series Bible are described as walking with a natural poise of striptease artist. And I think that language evokes the ways in which Roddenberry saw women as equals in miniskirts.
Lieutenant Uhura of Communications.
Ah, a Nubian prize. Taken on one of your raids of conquest, no doubt, Captain?
No doubt.
She has the melting eyes of the Queen of Sheba, the same lovely coloring.
I stood up to meet a fan and turned into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. I was speechless. And he told me that Star Trek was one of the only shows he and his wife allowed their little children to see, and how much they loved the show, for the concept of the show, and how much they loved Uhura.
Excuse me, Captain Kirk.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Scott.
What a charming negress. Oh, forgive me, my dear. I know that in my time some use that term as a description of property.
But why should I object to that term, sir? You see, in our century, we've learned not to fear words.
He said, your being there changes the face of television forever. And you've opened a door that must not be closed, must not be allowed to close.
Whoopi Goldberg said to me the first day she ever came to work on our series, because one of the curious things about The Next Generation was that this quite successful movie star asked if she could be on a syndicated TV series, and she didn't need to be doing this job. And she said that when she was a child growing up in New York, she had watched the original series, and there on the screen was this black woman who seemed to have a position of authority and was respected and was sexy and attractive and had a good time and was always in the center of things. And at that time, Whoopi, as a young girl, said to herself, well, one of us made it.
She said when she was 9 years old, she turned on the television. She was living in the project. She screamed through the house, "Come quick, there's a black lady on television and she's not a maid."
Open the channel, over.
Frequency open, sir.
People felt Uhura made an impact simply by being there. That's what Martin Luther King said, that is simply seeing Uhura on that ship gave representation of the fact that his dream for integrated society had come true, at least by the 24th century. On the other hand, she was simply a glorified telephone operator who said over and over, hailing frequencies are open, Captain.
Try GSK 783, subspace frequency 3.
But, sir, that's a call sign for private transmitter.
I'm very well aware of that, Lieutenant. Try it.
No program on American television has promised so much and delivered so little. Star Trek's promise of a utopian society which draws on many traditions of utopian fantasy and science fiction. A world where of tremendous tolerance, of infinite diversity and infinite combination, as the Vulcan philosophy would place it. And yet a world which continually fell back on stereotypical treatment of race, gender, and increasingly sexuality. A world that reflects the fantasies of a liberal LAPD cop.
So it is a utopia for yuppies, for megacorporate America, for the lovers of the military and folks who live that way, people who are satisfied with superficial, tokenistic representations of gender equality, racial equality, multiculturalism. It pays some lip service to those things. It seems to feel it needs to.
Star Trek is just as fallible as anything else. I think that the reason it's been so attractive to audiences over 30 years is that it, unlike a lot of science fiction, it offers a future that's better than the one that we're living in. I think Star Trek has always been about a group of characters that had a family-like quality to them, that people wanted to go and visit every week.
Yet in the late 1960s, not enough people were visiting. Star Trek was not thought to be a big enough hit, and after 3 seasons and a mere 79 episodes, the series was cancelled.
No one felt anything would ever happen with Star Trek again. When it went off the air, I believe it was in June of 1969, it had half of what its rating had been.
I had mixed feelings when the series was canceled at the end of the 3rd season. I was relieved to some degree because I was distressed about the direction the stories were taking. I was not happy with the quality of the work we were doing. I thought by and large we were on a downhill slide.
I guess we weren't sufficiently entertaining.
Star Trek just faded away, and no one felt there was any future to it at all.
We put on a pretty poor show, didn't we? Only I could forget.
It might not have proved its mass appeal, but it was acquiring cult status with a rapidly expanding number of passionate devotees.
Faith, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
I was aware of there was a phenomenon. There were Trekkies. There were people that, were really obsessed with it.
Trekkers.
Really?
You got to be PC. Trekkers.
Okay. Trekkers. Don't ever do that again.
Okay.
Star Trek embodies a way of life. It helps you to try to make the world a better place by starting in your own backyard.
It doesn't make us look like we're freaks or something enjoying a science fiction show. Together we're kind of like the oddballs, but yet we're for the future, and it's changed my life a lot. I can remember from when I was 10 years old, I was only allowed to watch certain TV shows, and Star Trek was one of the only ones. After my grandfather had watched it the first time, and he says, okay, just as long as you don't wear the ears. When you meet other Star Trek fans, you kind of bond with them almost immediately. My first Star Trek convention, these people didn't know me from Jack. But yet everybody was here, you know, guiding me here and guiding me there. My new family literally started that day.
A lot of people's lives have been affected by it. I mean, people who have made life choices because of their exposure to Star Trek. People who saw opportunities presented or ideas presented that motivated them in a positive way. And I think I've sensed quite a bit of that.
Well, the headline news from the Whitewater trial today occurred outside the courtroom when Judge Howard dismissed an alternate juror from her responsibilities. The woman raised eyebrows at the federal courthouse when she appeared each day in a Star Trek uniform.
She is the Whitewater juror everyone has ridiculed.
I decided to go in my uniform because the uniform, of course, represents the Trek principles and the Trek ideals, and that is personal liberties, personal freedoms, and, of course, justice. And so for it to be worn in a courtroom, of course, is appropriate.
Since day one of the trial, she's attracted nationwide attention that eventually got her thrown off the jury. Wednesday, Adams was caught giving a TV interview to the tabloid show American Journal. When Judge Howard learned she talked to the media, he dismissed her from the trial.
I answered questions about why I was wearing the uniform. Because the media was making such a circus out of it, I thought if I answered their questions, they would go away.
So we won't see her around the federal courthouse, but she does have a message.
So live long and prosper?
Adding an even more...
It's not that it's an obsession or something that totally consumes my life, but certainly the ideals of Trek are ideals that I live by, and so I'll stand up for those every day, 24 hours a day.
Be it known to all members of the Federation Alliance and the fleet, Lieutenant Bobby Adams will be promoted this day. She will attain the rank of Lieutenant Commander with the duties and privileges therein. May I present Lieutenant Commander Barbara Bobby Adams.
The media has tended to have an image of Star Trek fans as a fat, geeky guy with pimples, rubber Spock ears, and a velour uniform sort of stretched over his bulging stomach. That image includes sort of notions of the fan as infantile, and still living in his parents' basement, as overwrought up with television and with its place in culture. Get a life. It's only a television program. Of not being able to distinguish between fiction and reality. Fans are presented as aliens, as otherworldly. It's like they're beamed down from outer space. I think that's an odd perception. If we look at the fact that 53% of the American population, according to Harris Poll, are Star Trek fans.
I became a Klingon probably when I first seen them on the original series. But when I seen them with the ridges in their head and their uniforms on the Next Generation series, I was hooked. We get away with a lot of things there at the convention, and I think it's mainly because we are expected to.
Mine needs to be sharpened.
We act a certain way as long as we don't hurt anybody, and we try never to scare children.
I had to get completely naked to do my entire body.
I've been there. I've been the slave girl before. I know what that's like. Going back.
Stay still. Don't blend this in.
We have a lot more fun than the other groups. The party doesn't begin until the Klingons arrive.
What fans are doing is treating television culture as if it were a traditional folk culture. They've taken the series that was produced, and has become a major franchise, the Mickey Mouse of Paramount, and they take that material and they make it the basis for their own grassroots culture.
There is a monastery in New Mexico where you can go to learn to be Klingon from the inside. And then, until you learn it, let me give you a little secret. If you say something mad at somebody, and you say it sounding a little bit like German, who's to say that it's not Klingon? Beats me. I don't know what it means, but it sounded good, didn't it? What I'm doing right now is cutting a female, it's a panty liner. And that's why you don't see Klingon sweating. It goes right inside the headpiece, and it's the most absorbent material that we could find. You put on the final crowning touch, which is what gives us our ridges in our hair, and actually our attitudes. We put on crowning glory, which is our Klingon headpiece. And pull the hair across, and here we have the Shema Domesha.
I think that's what fans do. They enact those roles. They imagine themselves to be Klingons or Andorians. They write stories. They compose songs. They paint pictures. They are the most creative force in relation to American television that's out there. And they've turned what was a minor failure on network television into a deep and rich folk culture that is central to American cultural identity in the 80s and 90s.
There was always this nagging issue of Star Trek, because all through the 70s there was this voracious demand for reruns, and finally, when our audience had had enough of that, there was this voice that kept saying, give us more Star Trek, more Star Trek.
We want Star Trek. We want Star Trek. We want Star Trek. And after about a decade and a half, Paramount kind of sat there and said, maybe we should give them Star Trek. We don't know why. We just have this sort of dull ache in our face that leads us to believe that maybe they might be interested in Star Trek.
Fan power helped resurrect Star Trek. The original cast was reunited in 1979 for what would become a blockbuster run of feature films. But Gene Roddenberry had been relieved of much of the creative control of the films. Instead, he directed his energies into getting a new incarnation of Star Trek on TV. A series that would conform to his singular vision of Star Trek's future.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
The most important rules to think about were that Gene believed when he created The Next Generation, even more so than when he created the original series, that he wanted very little conflict within his core group of characters. He felt that 24th Century Man had gone beyond that. 24th Century Man did not bicker, did not develop conflicts with his fellow man.
Some problem, Riker. Just hoping this isn't the usual way our missions will go, sir.
Oh, no, number one. I'm sure most will be much more interesting. Let's see what's out there. Engage.
I was startled to hear that they were planning on another Star Trek television series with a whole new cast. And I was, on a very personal level, I was taken aback because I thought, is it possible that a new series could be successful without us?
There were a lot of people before the show went on the air that said, how can you replace Kirk and Spock? These are like venerable, mythological heroes.
This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise.
Jim, you can't hand over the Enterprise.
We're irresolute. We're determined. Your help is not required.
I'm in command here.
Get off my ship.
In their own particular way, fans vehemently debate the controversy. Which is the best, Classic Trek or TNG?
Now, what's this I hear you think Picard is loved more than Kirk? Impossible.
They all love Picard.
Picard? A Frenchman with an English accent? And this outfit. Kirk never went for the kinky jumpsuit look.
Kirk couldn't get into a kinky jumpsuit. Besides, Picard can speak all kinds of alien languages, including fluent Klingon.
Klingon? Klingons never even had a word for surrender until they met Kirk. Besides, your chief security officer running around your ship with a ponytail. That would never happen on Kirk's ship.
Kirk's chief of security would never live long enough to grow one. I know this is hard for you, but everyone loves Picard, especially the women.
Women? You're kidding. Unlike Picard, Kirk has sex more than once a season.
Sex with Picard is worth waiting a whole series for. I have only 3 words. Make it so.
I have 3 words for you. Have more tea.
I think I have become a marginally better listener as a result of playing this character, because it's one of the things that Captain Picard does quite well. He's very good at paying attention to others and asking for and listening to other opinions. I mean, it's one of the characteristics that set him apart from James T. Kirk.
It intrigues me. This Picard. In what manner, sir? Remarkably analytical and dispassionate for a human.
When I announced at a couple of Star Trek conventions that I, as Spock, would be appearing in an episode of The Next Generation, I was hit by a wall of emotion and sound. A wall just came at me, like a roar of approval. And I realized that my appearance in The Next Generation was going to be a sort of a healing of a family schism.
Interesting. I had not considered that.
Data was a pretty well-developed role when I got it. Basically, there was a line in the pilot episode where the character of Riker calls Data Pinocchio, and I thought, that's the hook. That's who he is. Of course, he's the, wooden boy who wants to be human, and that's the catch.
What are you? I'm Data, an android. I am many things. Intriguing. Scholar. Lover.
You are fully functional, aren't you?
Genius.
I think Data and I are very different creatures, and I would love to be Data. Data's pure and incapable of cruelty and unkindness.
Vamoose, you little varmint.
Was that funny?
No.
Knowing Data as I have over the 9 years hasn't made me any better a person, I'm afraid,
There was a young lady from Venus whose body was shaped like a... Captain to security, come in! Did I say something wrong?
I don't understand their humor either. The Klingon character was probably the most special character, the newest and freshest character.
Excuse me, there'd been Klingons before.
Not
there had
on the
never
Enterprise.
been an empath before. So
I wonder
she was,
why. I wonder.
She was the freshest, newest character, if we're going to get down to this.
You're worried.
With reason. I think it is perhaps best to be ignorant of certain elements of Klingon psyche.
I started out with him a certain, very angry and very intense and
surly.
Surly.
He was surly.
Klingons do not laugh.
Oh, yes, they do. Absolutely they do. You don't. But I've heard Klingon belly laughs that curl your hair.
I do not laugh because I do not feel like laughing.
And he was a joy to be around.
Yeah, all right. Not the
Because he
first year.
lived the part that first year.
I did live the part.
Gene came home one day. He said, Majel, I've got a great part for you. This is in The Next Generation. He says, a fantastic part for you. You don't have to act.
Oh, let me talk to them. I'm sure I'm more articulate than that.
That's how the Mother from Hell was born.
Mother, please don't do this to me.
Do what to you, little one? Oh, Jean-Luc,
What naughty thoughts. But how wonderful you still think of me like that.
I love her. I've had women yell at me across parking lots in supermarkets saying, "You've done more for women over 40 than any movement in America."
The Next Generation was created in the mid-'80s in America, and you can see some subtle mirroring there. For instance, the presence of a psychotherapist on board.
Even when I was a child, I always had a dreadful fear that if ever I was dematerialized, that I would never come back again whole.
I always thought it was a little peculiar, particularly because these heroes, as Gene devised them, were flawless. They were 24th century human beings without petty jealousy or any petty emotions whatsoever or hang-ups.
I know. Sounds crazy.
It's not crazy at all. You are being taken apart molecule by molecule. Reg, you're not the first person to have anxiety about transporting.
I feel if anything makes the next generation, or will make the next generation feel antiquated, it will be the presence of a therapist. People will say, "Oh, how quaint. Remember when psychotherapy was popular?"
We look at the Russians as the communists, as the enemy. And my take on it was Klingons are the Russians because they are looked on as a particular type of race. All through, I don't know how many years, 20 years or however long it was, they were these wild, the enemy, the mean guys, the bad guys to kill on sight, and Kirk had all these problems with them and all that type of thing. And we have come to find out that they are not. They are people. Blah. Goodbye. That image that we have of them is totally wrong. There is a part of them, yes, that is that way, but all society is violent. I mean, you look at, we look at Klingons as barbarians. How many times in the original series did Kirk say he's going to level a planet if they didn't give him back a couple of guys? I'm going to destroy your whole race if you don't give me back Scotty.
Captain's log supplemental. We have been attacked without provocation by an alien race which Guinan calls the Borg.
You can't outrun them. You can't destroy them. If you damage them, the essence of what they are remains. They regenerate and keep coming. Eventually, you will weaken. They are relentless.
With the Klingons neutered, the new foe are a race of cyborgs, complete with chilling catchphrase. You will be assimilated.
Fascinating.
I'm not sure the genesis of the Borg, why they were created. The notion of them is really quite brilliant, and I think it works so well because as Americans particularly, who cherish the myth of individuality, are terribly frightened of the idea of losing that individuality and being consumed by a collective consciousness.
We are Borg. You will be assimilated.
The word dependent in America, of course, is like an obscenity. But in fact, many, if not most cultures on this planet are very codependent or interdependent. For instance, a culture like Japan. But to Americans, it's the pits. And the Borg work, I think, very well on that level. They're unstoppable, they're unbeatable, they adapt to every weapon, and they just look cool, too.
After Gene's death, and with a new senior executive producer, the series, to its benefit, got more of an edge to it. It became tougher in taking a stand on certain issues. And in the same way that I have seen here in America and have learnt about, because I've really lived away from England for 10 years, the disillusionment that followed on those, that euphoria of for many people, the Thatcher and Reagan years, the disappointment and the anger and irritation that has grown out of that, also was reflected in certain aspects of Star Trek. But it'll be interesting. I mean, that'll be for the cultural sociologists of the 21st century to examine. They'll have a lot to work on with Star Trek, actually.
I think it is just possible that a few hundred years from now, Star Trek might be seen as the Iliad and the Odyssey of a world culture, the common mythical base referred to in the moral arguments of the day. Like the Jesus of the Gospel of Mark, Roddenberry affirms that we are all sons and daughters of God. I believe there is enough stuff, particularly in Star Trek The Next Generation, in terms of moral tales and substance, to excite people about what the moral struggle for human life is all about. I believe it's a wonderful new story that's presented to us here, in which each of the episodes has some moral fiber for us to chew on. I look at Captain Picard as sort of a Moses, played by the English actor Patrick Stewart, leading us into the promised land of the future.
I truly believe that people look at each episode and read something into it for themselves. I think people find things in there that we never intended to be there. We didn't write them in, we didn't act them in, we didn't score them in, we didn't cut them in. They are just there, and people look at the episodes and find something for them. And when they find something for them, they take it, they enjoy it, they pass it on, and it becomes what it is now.
Star Trek has spawned many cultural manifestations, one of the strangest being slash fiction.
Spock could hear the music from halfway down the long gravel driveway which led up to the sprawling ranch home. And as he approached, the unexpected sight from an increasingly predictable source became clearer. Jim was in drag. Slash writers write about love, romantic, cartoon, pretty sickening, mushy romantic love. And they write love poems, and what they see in each other's eyes. There are whole pages devoted to Kirk's eyes, the incredible color of his hazel eyes, that kind of thing.
Now, one way to think about Slash is to remember a scene that many Star Trek fans would have been deeply moved by. The scene in Star Trek The Wrath of Khan where Spock is dying. And there's a moment there where Spock is inside this glass chamber and he is dying, and Kirk comes racing down there. They have one last exchange with his friends. And Kirk is literally pressing his hands against the glass, and Spock is on the other side of the glass pressing forward. And Spock says,
I have been, and always shall be, your friend.
The closest Spock has ever been able to come to an emotional statement of his true feelings for Kirk. Kirk's machismo has never allowed him to express how he feels towards Spock. Spock's Vulcan stoicism doesn't allow him to express his feelings. And they're pressed against the glass, and we all recognize the ticking clock, the fact that they can never come in contact with each other. What Slash does as a fantasy is takes away the glass.
The ensemble was garish, even to Spock, who had seen much in his time. But the yards of swirling rainbow crepe, accompanied by the grinding rhythm Jim called neo-disco, was simply more than the travel and shock-weary Spock could handle. If you can put Kirk in drag, or if you can show him in a disempowered position just for a few minutes where Spock's the one in control, there is some pleasure in that, because Kirk is just so incredibly offensive. His utter lack of need for anyone or anything other than his technology, his extended phallus ship, and ordering everyone about. I feel this desire to pull him down a peg or 2 or 3 or 10. So it does that. But, of course, there's also an attraction. There's also I wish I could have him. I wish I could be him. I've decided, Jim said, out of breath. I want to go to all those ambassadors' receptions in this. Hell, they'll probably all want to dance with me. Spock tried to join in. I'll never let them, of course. I just love it when you get jealous.
The Star Trek franchise continues. 2 new incarnations are now beaming simultaneously onto American television. First came Deep Space Nine, set on a frontier space station. 2 years on, Paramount launched the latest Star Trek, Voyager.
I have no doubt that its popularity will diminish at some point. Perhaps it's already diminishing. I don't know. I'm much too immersed in it. I hope not. But I think it's only natural, because that's how things go. They become very popular, and then people get sick of it, and it wanes for a little bit. But something tells me Star Trek's going to be around for a very long time. A, because it has been around for 30 years, and B, because it's so elegant and simple a premise. It's just a group of people out seeing what's new. And particularly in America, since we've kind of conquered America, we've found America. America is here, it's been explored. There is an unquenchable thirst for a new frontier, and it was a brilliant phrase that Gene put in there. It is the final frontier.